Welcome to my channel. Have you ever made a mistake so big that it stayed with you for years? A mistake that made you feel small, embarrassed, even angry at yourself, but later it became the lesson that changed everything? Today, I'm going to tell you about my mistake. It was painful, yes, but it taught me one of the most important lessons of my life. And maybe it can teach you something too. So stay with me till the end because I promise this story will make you look at your mistakes in a whole new way. Chapter 1: The Big Mistake. When I was a young English teacher, I wanted to be perfect. I wanted my students to think, wow, our teacher never makes a mistake. I prepared my lessons carefully. I practiced my pronunciation, and I even wrote every example sentence on paper before class. I thought that if I worked hard enough, nothing could go wrong. But one day, something did, and it became the mistake that taught me the most. It happened on a Friday morning. The class was full, around 20 students, all smiling and ready. I was teaching adjectives that day, simple words like funny, boring, exciting. I was feeling good. Then one student asked me, "Teacher, what's the difference between bored and boring?" I smiled confidently and started explaining. But I said something completely wrong. I said, "I am boring when I watch TV." Everyone looked confused. One student laughed a little, another whispered something to her friend. Then suddenly, the whole class started laughing. At first, I didn't understand. Then it hit me. I had just told my students that I was boring. I wanted to hide under the table. In that moment, my face felt hot. I tried to laugh too, but inside, I was embarrassed. I thought, how could I make such a silly mistake? I'm the teacher. I felt small, like I had failed. I even thought maybe I wasn't good enough to teach English. It was just one sentence, but it felt like the end of the world. After class, I sat alone for a long time. I kept thinking about what happened. I wanted to forget it, but I couldn't. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something. I wasn't really angry because of the mistake. I was angry because I wanted to be perfect, and maybe that was the real problem. Nobody can learn or teach or live perfectly, but at that time, I didn't know that yet. That day, I went home with one big question in my head. Why do we feel so bad when we make a mistake? I didn't have the answer then, but soon I was going to find it. Chapter 2: The Feeling of Failure. After that day in class, I couldn't stop thinking about my mistake. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my students' faces laughing. I kept repeating the sentence in my head: I am boring when I watch TV. It was like a little alarm ringing in my brain reminding me that I had failed. And yes, it felt like failure. I felt embarrassed, frustrated, and a little ashamed of myself. I remember sitting at my desk that evening thinking, why do I feel this way? It was just one sentence. It's not the end of the world. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew bigger. I compared myself to other teachers I admired. They seemed perfect, calm, and confident. And then I thought about my students. What if they thought I wasn't a good teacher? What if they stopped listening to me? The feeling of failure is strange. Sometimes it makes us quiet, sometimes angry, sometimes sad. That day, it made me quiet. I didn't want to call anyone. I didn't want to talk. I just sat there with my notebook thinking about how one small mistake could feel like a mountain. I realized something important: mistakes make us feel small because we care. We care about doing our best. And that is not bad. It is human. But here is the interesting part: even though it hurt, this feeling started to teach me something. I began to notice how my students were learning, not just from me, but from everything in the classroom, even from my mistakes. I saw how they laughed, how they repeated the sentence correctly after I explained it again, how they tried to speak English with more confidence. Suddenly, I understood that mistakes are not the end, they are a beginning. Still, I didn't feel ready to accept it fully. I was embarrassed every time I remembered it. But deep inside, I felt a small spark, a little curiosity. Maybe this mistake wasn't just a failure. Maybe it was a lesson waiting to be discovered. And that thought stayed with me. It made me wonder, what could I learn from this embarrassment? How could I turn my mistake into something useful, something that would help me and even my students grow? By the end of that evening, I was still tired, still a little upset, but I felt something new too: a tiny hope. The hope that one day I could look at this mistake not with shame, but with understanding. And that hope became the first step toward the most important lesson I was about to learn. Chapter 3: The Lesson Hidden Inside. The next day, I went back to class feeling nervous. I was afraid that my students would remember my mistake and think I was a bad teacher. But something surprising happened. When I started the lesson, I noticed my students were smiling, not in a mean way, but in a friendly, curious way. They were listening carefully, repeating words, and even asking more questions than usual. That's when I realized something very important. My mistake had actually helped them learn. I started thinking about it carefully. In English, we often learn by making mistakes. When you speak, sometimes you use the wrong word. Sometimes your grammar is wrong. Maybe your pronunciation is not perfect. And when someone corrects you, you remember it better. You remember because your brain notices that something went wrong and wants to fix it. I had always taught this idea to my students, but now I experienced it myself. My mistake had made the lesson more memorable, more real, and even more fun. I remember one student, Rena, who had always been shy to speak English. That day, she repeated my wrong sentence correctly, laughing at herself. She said, "Teacher, you are not boring, you are funny." The whole class laughed, including me. I laughed too. And at that moment, I understood a very simple but powerful truth. Mistakes are not bad, they are teachers. They show us what we need to improve, and they make learning stronger. After that day, I started to look at mistakes differently. I wrote them down, I shared them with my students, and I even made small games out of them. We would guess what the mistake was, correct it together, and celebrate when someone learned something new. The classroom became full of energy, laughter, and learning. I realized that the more mistakes we accept, the faster we improve in English, in teaching, and even in life. This lesson was not only about grammar or words, it was about courage, patience, and curiosity. I learned that being afraid of mistakes stops learning, but being curious about mistakes opens doors. And at that moment, I promised myself that I would never hide my mistakes again. I would use them. I would share them. I would learn from them. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The real change was about to happen not just in me, but in the way I taught my students. And that leads us to something even more important, changing the way we think. Chapter 4, The Change in Thinking. After that mistake, and after seeing the small lesson hidden inside it, I started thinking differently. I began to see every mistake not as a failure, but as a chance to learn. I realized that in English, just like in life, mistakes are part of the process. When we make them, we notice what we don't know, and then we can fix it. That day, I decided to change the way I taught and the way I lived. The first thing I changed was my own attitude. I stopped trying to be perfect. I stopped worrying that a wrong word or sentence would make me look bad. Instead, I smiled, laughed, and corrected myself openly in front of my students. And something amazing happened. My students started doing the same. They made mistakes, and instead of hiding, they tried again. They asked questions more freely. They spoke louder and laughed at their errors. Learning became exciting, not scary. I also changed the way I gave lessons. Before, I wanted everything to be correct, neat, and planned. After my mistake, I started leaving space for errors, for guesses, for trial and error. I would say, it's okay if you say it wrong. Try, and we will fix it together. Suddenly, the classroom became a place of freedom. Students were more confident, more curious, and they started helping each other. I was no longer the perfect teacher. I was a guide, learning with them, making mistakes with them, and celebrating every small improvement. But the change didn't stop in the classroom. I also changed the way I practiced English myself. I stopped fearing speaking with native speakers, even if I said something wrong. I started noticing that every error taught me a new word, a better sentence, or a different pronunciation. I realized that the mistakes I had once hated were actually the fastest way to improve. I felt a new kind of energy excitement instead of fear, curiosity instead of embarrassment. And this was the moment I understood a very important truth. Your mistakes are your teachers if you let them be, are not signs that you are bad or not ready. They are signs that you are learning. They are proof that you are moving forward. That day, I decided to embrace every mistake, not just for me, but for my students too. Little did I know, embracing mistakes would lead to something even bigger, the power of sharing them. And that's exactly what happened next. Chapter 5, The Power of Sharing Mistakes. After I started changing my thinking, I noticed something very powerful. My mistakes didn't just teach me, they could teach others too. One day, I decided to be honest with my class. I told them about my mistake with the sentence, I am boring when I watch TV. I laughed, they laughed, and then I asked them, what can we learn from this? The students started thinking, and one by one, they shared their ideas. Suddenly, the mistake became a lesson for everyone, not just me. That moment changed the classroom forever. I realized that sharing mistakes makes learning stronger. When we hide mistakes, we feel embarrassed and we stop trying. But when we share them, we show that mistakes are normal and we invite others to learn too. I started asking my students to share their mistakes every day. Sometimes it was a pronunciation error, sometimes a wrong grammar sentence, sometimes even a word they didn't understand. And every time we laughed, corrected it together, and learned something new. I remember one student, Ahmed. He was always quiet because he was afraid of making mistakes. One day, he said a sentence completely wrong, but I smiled and said, "Thank you, Ahmed. Let's fix it together." After that, Ahmed started speaking more confidently. He made mistakes every day, but each mistake made him stronger. By the end of the month, he was speaking English much better. That's when I realized mistakes don't just teach you, they teach the people around you too. They create a space where learning is fun, safe, and real. Sharing mistakes also made me a better teacher. I stopped worrying about looking perfect, and I focused on helping students understand and enjoy learning. I started using mistakes as lessons, stories, and examples, and the classroom became full of energy. Students were laughing, speaking, and learning faster than ever. They weren't afraid anymore. They were curious. And I understood one very important truth. The power of a mistake grows when it is shared. From that day, I made a rule for myself and my students. Don't hide mistakes. Celebrate them. Learn from them. Share them. And every time we do, we grow not just a little, but a lot. Mistakes are no longer something to fear. They are friends. And now, after learning this, I want to share the most important lesson, the lesson that changed everything about teaching, learning, and life. This is what I will tell you in the final chapter. Chapter 6, The Final Lesson. After all these experiences, the embarrassment, the learning, the sharing, I finally understood the most important lesson of all. Mistakes are not something to hide, not something to fear, and not something that makes us less. They are teachers. They are proof that we are trying, that we are learning, and that we are growing. That one small sentence, "I am boring when I watch TV," which once made me feel so embarrassed, became the reason I became a better teacher, a better learner, and even a better person. I realized that in English learning, mistakes are your best friends. When you speak and make errors, your brain notices what is wrong and helps you correct it. When you write and get feedback, you learn faster. When you share your mistakes with others, you create a space where learning becomes exciting, not scary. I had spent years thinking that perfection was the goal, but perfection is an illusion. Growth is the real goal, and growth comes from mistakes, practice, and courage. This lesson is not just for teachers or students, it is for everyone learning English or learning anything in life. If you are afraid of making mistakes, remember this story. Remember my embarrassing sentence in class. Remember that mistakes are normal. Remember that mistakes are opportunities. And remember, the more mistakes you make, the more you learn. Since that day, I have embraced mistakes in every class, in every lesson, and in every conversation. I laugh at them, learn from them, and share them. And I see my students doing the same. They are braver, more confident, and happier learners. That's the real power of mistakes. They teach, they connect, and they transform. So, Here is my message to you. Don't fear mistakes. Use them, learn from them, share them. Every mistake you make is a step forward. Every mistake is a teacher waiting to help you. And one day, you will look back and see that the mistakes you once feared became the moments that taught you the most. If this story helped you think differently about your mistakes, then don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and share it with someone who is learning English. And I want to hear from you right in the comments. What is one mistake that taught you something? Your story might help someone else, just like my mistake helped me and my students.